Namaskar, welcome to another edition of Navimash book reading series. So, today we are going to discuss and also summarize the book India and the Changing World Order. This book is authored by Mr. S. Gurumurthy. Uh, why we are reading this book? Actually, it's needs to be emphasized. Whatever we are seeing today, correct, from 2014 onwards, when the Narendra Modi led government came into power at the center in India, and we have seen a lot of policies, a lot of economic policies, foreign policy, and a few other things which are going on since 2014. Oh, अभी तो काउंट नहीं किया है, but let's see how many books are there. But there are almost 100 plus books remains to be read. तो बहुत सारा books हैं. So we will try to read those books in the coming weeks, days, and months. But thank you for your reminding that how many books we have read. I think we need to do a count. We will do a session on this as well to understand कि कितने books हमने पढ़े हैं. But one thing I forgot, so let me actually do something on the stream itself. Uh, there is one update I need to do on the stream itself, which needs to be done. And this is this. Okay, this is done. But this is a very important book. So why I was like having this book and skimmed through the book to actually discuss whatever we are seeing, the economic policy, the foreign policy, which the Modi government is now continuing for last 10 plus years and their third year in the government, and that we need to see how shape up. So actually to understand, like a lot of people see Indian policy from the Western lens. Okay. But there is an organization called Vivekananda Foundation. So Vivekananda International Foundation. So this is the very not much known, uh, not much discussed policy institute where a lot of policies are formulated and delivered to the government, and not too many people are aware of it because it's a very uh, like how would I say, not a very well known and well publicized organization, but they do play a very important role in the policy formations of Modi government, Modi led government, NDA government. So, in that sense, because this book is written by Mr. S. Gurumurthy, who is the ideologue of Sangh RSS, and a lot of inputs goes into the governing structure of the current government, and also it has gone into for the last 10 years when the Modi government came into power. So, in that context, this book is important to actually understand where we stand, what policies were there, and how the government sees the policies, how the government perspective of future of India. So, in that context, it is there. So, this book contains around let's say 9 chapters. The first chapter is called From the Age of Enlightenment to the Age of China Challenges, China Challenge, Abstract Ideas Emerging Concrete. Number two is A Helicopter View, The World Today and the Future Outlooks. Number three is Afghanistan, Re-Emergence of Taliban, Omnious for the Entire World. India and the Changing World Order, an assessment. I think today we are going to read the chapter 4 and 5 if possible, because chapters are pretty big actually. Number 5 is the Indian picture, economic, internal security, border issues with China and China Pakistan axis. Okay, let's see which one we should read today. But before we read, I have a small presentation to actually give to the people, to give to the audience, and also one more thing. Let me see if I can put that thing. 100 plus, yes, 100 plus. And we also are going to invite the audience to come and talk to us. So for that, what I have done is I'm just putting the link for the audience to join on the members only post. So at the end or the middle of the reading session, if the audience wants to interact and talk to us regarding this specific topic, you can come and join us. Let me just put this stream link for the members only so that they can join. And people who want to support us, we need your help, okay, to run this channel. So do consider helping us by joining the channel. So the membership is around 89 rupees. So that would help to run the channel, and also subscribe to the channel. Share our content. If you like our content, do share it. I'm just going to, and I will share the presentation shot. Okay, the link is there for the audience to join in the members only post. So if you are a channel member, you can join the discussion by going to the post community post section of the channel, where you will find the link to join the discussion, and we'll take a few comments and then we will start the reading. Okay, so we have Vyom joined. Hi Abhay, namaskar. Okay, so let's start the reading. But before reading, let me share the screen. Mhm. Okay, we have. Let me see if this works. Yeah. So do let me know if you can. Yeah, the presentation is there. So I'm going to go through the presentation. Do let me know if you can see the screen. I'll try to increase the font if I can. Let me just check. Not this one. Hmm. Okay. This will not be. I think we need to do one more. Let me open the primary presentation. Okay, this should be visible to everybody. Yeah, it is there. So this is the presentation that we had created. So this is the book India and the Changing World, analysis of the transition to the Western universalism from multi-modern civilization future. So this the book name is India and the Changing World by Mr. S. Gurumurthy. These are actually few of the lectures are there in the public domain. Few are written in various magazines, as articles. So it's a compilation in many sense. The central thesis of S. Gurumurthy's positions that the post-World War II world order is undergoing a global churn. We are seeing, correct? We are seeing currently the American hegemony is weakening. We are seeing the Middle East is going through a very volatile period. And since World War II, for almost now what almost 70 years. If 1940, 1940s was the Second World War, then we are almost in 70 plus years, where America was the unipolar power, the only superpower, and they have become the policeman of the world. But now we see that it is now being slowly the American hegemony power is weakening, and a multipolar world is emerging, where you have BRICS as the very potent alliance between China, USA, and Russia emerging as the global south, the global south powerhouse. And you will have multipolar world. So you will have America dominating the Atlantic, okay, and the North and South American continents. Russia will have its sphere of influence, and in the Indian Ocean, India is going to play a very pivotal role in terms of security and power projections. Its blue water navy is going to help in that sense. So there are few things. Civilization state. India must be viewed as a 5,000-year-old civilization, not a mere post 1947 nation state. That's a very core thesis of Mr. Gurumurthy, and also the kind of overtures which we are seeing from Mr. Narendra Modi by gifting Gita to various guests. It shows that Mr. Narendra Modi is showcasing the 5,000-year-old civilization as a continued the Indian state which was created in 1947 is the is continuing the heritage of 5,000-year-old civilization which existed, rather than the American state which is 250 years old. Economic resilience, rooting development in social capital and household savings rather than debt driven model. So we are seeing, correct, economically, Asian the Asian continent itself, they are a saving society. They save and they spend judiciously. Where we have seen uncontrolled debt being taken by European and American countries to actually finance their own economies. And the fourth point, which the book actually covers, is the strategic autonomy, positioning India as a stabilizing pole in the US China India global triad. We're going to see the US China India triad. You can add Russia into that as well in later stages, but right now it is not there. The emerging paradigm, the failure of the post Cold War illusion. The collapse of global universalism and end of history critique. I think many people might know the famous historian called Francis Fukuyama, and he had famously proclaimed the end of history after the Second World War when America and the Allied were victorious, and the Western liberal democracy as the ultimate form of governance. But we have seen in the recent times the Russia-Ukraine war, the European economy is faltering, the American economy also not doing well, and the total, not total but partial collapse of the American hegemony as well. So there are 3 points which are here: the inability of the Western values to homogenize diverse culture, the Western, the American concept of liberal democracy, which will be able to actually conquer every cultural diversity, traditions, and triumph as the primary mode of governance culture, that has failed miserably. So the liberal democracy was not able to actually get infused with the civilizational values that the civilization states like China, India, Japan mm, inherit from their previous generations. The re-emergence of national identities over globalized citizenship. So this concept of global citizen, right, where your loyalties are not bound by your place of birth, your culture, your traditions, your faith systems, they do not matter in the liberal democracy setup. But as we humans, we need that grounding, reassure ourselves of our existence. A move from globalism back to internationalism. This is a very important term, globalism. Right? People might remember that a movie called Dhurandhar was released, and a very famous actor mentioned in his post that we are a global citizens, global humans, are not tied to our own culture, tradition, and place of birth. So it has, unfortunately, that didn't work. Rise of multi-modernity. Every civilization modernizes in its own mind, using its own cultural vocabulary. Very, very important to note that Japan is as traditional society as can be, but it is as modern and even more modern, more advanced than even few American or European states. The kind of technology that we see in Japan is something which even Americans and the Europeans can't replicate. So this Westernism is equal to modernism, which was sold to us for over 70 to 80 decades. It was false and it had to collapse. So it has collapsed. So accepting technology, efficiency, and scientific advancement as global tools, but not Westernization. Japan, Bharat, China, and also many civilization states in Asia, they have their own values. The liberal democratic values cannot be imposed upon these ancient civilizations who have lived for thousands of years. So, rejecting the imposition of Western social norms and enlightenment based secularism. Rootedness to rootedness. Civilizations like India, Japan, Russia modernize while retaining their ancestral traditions. Understanding the global churn. So there is a book by Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal called the Ocean of Churn, specifically the Indian Ocean, which was the heartbeat of ancient trade routes and which benefited Bharat and many other Asian and other countries. The churn refers to a period of transition where old power structures, G7 Atlantic led order, are losing grip while new ones, BRICS, Indo Pacific, are yet to fully solidify. So the churn means it is still going on. The transatlantic alliance between European Union, and the American, they held power for almost 7 to 8 decades. Okay. But they are losing their power in terms of their influence over the economy, over the geopolitical order, and BRICS and Indo-Pacific. Uh, I think there, I think we have Quad, but Quad, US also is a part of the Quad. But overall, BRICS as the primary political alliance, which represents the global South, it is yet to solidify, but it's in the process of it. So in 1991 is a very important date when the Soviet Union collapses and US became the sole superpower. And in 2024, the rise of multipolar world, the reassertion of civilization identity, failure of debt-led globalization to provide inclusive growth. I'll take the comments little bit later. Let me go through the presentation and then also I'll read the book as well. Part 2, Market Economics and Social Capital. Now, the word social capital is very important here. Socio-economic foundations of national strength. So, debt is primary the driver of economic growth in the Western sense, but in the Asian sense, savings is the primary mode of growth. China, India, Japan, and many other countries. Market economics versus market society. Gurumurthy makes a critical distinction borrowed from thinkers like Karl Polanyi. Market economics, an efficient mechanism for resource allocation and trade. Good, it's required. Market society, a state where every social relationship, family, trust, duty is for sale. Now, this is a very important part that we need to understand. The cultural values, the traditional values that Bharatiya society and even Chinese, Japanese, even Russians, we are rooted in our family traditions, in our stake at the family, at the even family which is the like you have a brother sisters, they all constitute one economic block. The primary distinction between the Western style economy, where every individual is an economic unit, but when we are talking about Bharatiya civilization, the Asian civilizations, The family is an economic unit, not an individual. So we did not need state-led handouts, welfare to actually take care, because we had a family, which was a kind of a social security net which was provided. If I lose a job, if somebody gets sick, the family takes care of it. You don't need the state to come and help you in that. You don't have to beg. So the Indian way, keeping the market within the social framework. Markets are important. So Bharat at once was 30 to 35% of the global GDP. We were trading. We were trading with the Greece, Egypt, and many other countries, with China, with the places in Southeast Asia. We were trading. So we know how the market works, but our economy was also rooted in that distinction of family as a unit, economic unit, rather than an individual. So keeping the market within the social framework, not letting the market consume the society, very important. The Western-led economies or economic framework of individual as a economic unit has destroyed the family structures, the birth rates of the Western societies, including Japan, which has lost its birth rates, South Korea, Europe, America, it has gone that route. But the way the dharmic approach works, it keeps the family as the primary focus, so that the society is stable and it prospers over a long period of time. India's bedrock, the savers economy. Indian, Chinese, Japanese, and even other Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam, where we save, we don't spend indiscriminately. After liberalization, we have seen in like in South Korea, in Japan as well, we have seen this uh, rot of spending a lot of money on consumer goods to make us happy for a few seconds. So the Western model is consumption at debt driven. If you can remember that America has a debt of around $38 trillion, and the American student loan is bigger than the size of countries' GDPs. The credit card debt in US is also very big. So the whole economy is driven by consumption and debt driven. While the Indian model is household savings driven, where the family saves to protect the future of the family and family members. Family units. Family, not the individual, is the core economic unit of Bharat. Gold and assets. India's massive private gold holding act as a silent national reserve, which is going to play a very important and pivotal role when in, in a couple of years, maybe 2030 or later, we will see gold as become the primary asset in terms of asset class holdings. Low leverage. Inherent cultural aversion to high personal debt provides stability. Market economics and market society. I think this is done. This is critique of Western financialization. Very important part that the family is not the family bonds that we share with our members, with the family members. They cannot be equated or converted into money. So the debt trap of the West. Gurumurthy analyzes how the 2008 financial crisis was symptom of a deeper rot, the decoupling of finance from real production, where the financial products became the primary drivers of economic growth rather than real products. Speculation, growth built on financial engineering rather than actual manufacturing. So the 2008 financial crisis was a classic case of seed. They are called, I think, CDCs, collateral debt obligation, CDCs, and they were a kind of a financial engineering where the housing loan of the American people were made a product of financial product of derivatives, and that was the main problem, main point of the speculation which led to the financial crisis of 2008. Short termism, quarterly profit obsession versus civilizational long term thinking. Yes, profits are important, but you cannot sacrifice your long term future just looking at the quarterly results. Fragility, high debt models collapse under the slightest interest rate fluctuation that we have seen in 2008. What happened? Part 3, the civilizational state, identity, pluralism, and strategic survival. Nation state versus civilization state. A nation state is a modern political construct with a fixed constitution and borders. A civilizational state is a living continuity of history, philosophy, and people. It encompasses the people, their ethos, their history, their culture. Continuity. India's core identity predates 1947 Republic. Shared mind. The common cultural markers dharma, karma, unity in diversity across geography. Inclusive rise. The rise of India is the re-emergence of its civilizational mind. This is interesting. Karl Popper, theory of the Indian context. Karl Popper is a very well-known political scientist. So, in his context, if we extend the unlimited tolerance even to those who are intolerant, if we are not prepared to defend a tolerant society against the onslaught of intolerant, then the tolerant will be destroyed and the tolerance with them. India, a naturally pluralistic and tolerant civilization, must set strategic boundaries against expansionist and intolerant ideologies to ensure its own survival. A lot of our subscribers and audience knows we have read a lot of books on this since I think 1000 AD. Okay, for thousand years, correct. Bharat was invaded by first by the Islamic invaders. Then we had the Portuguese, the Dutch, and at last the English who came, and they were intolerant towards the Bharatiya ethos. They came just to loot our wealth. So, and if we as a people are going to accept this intolerance to our ethos and beliefs, then we will not survive. And we are seeing, correct, the states like Pakistan, Bangladesh have emerged since 1947 and Bangladesh in 1971, that if you are going to be tolerant towards the intolerance, then you are going to make yourself the sacrificial goat and you will not survive. So its time has come up for us to actually regain our strength and fight the intolerant if they are not respecting our values. The global geopolitics, the global triad and strategic autonomy, dharmic pluralism versus Western secularism. Very interesting terms. Gurumurthy argues that India doesn't need Western secularism because its core dharma is already pluralistic. Dharma is by its nature is tolerant towards the other. We don't need the facade of secularism to actually be tolerant of the other. Western secularism, born out of conflict between church and state. This is very important part to note. The origin of secularism is that church was intolerant towards the state. Church wanted to control power and remain the only power center. It is the state enforced neutrality or separation from religion. Secularism is only required when one part of the state, one part's church was trying to exercise power over the whole society and the government. Dharmic pluralism, inherent in the Indian mind, ekam sat vipra bahuda vadanti. It is the socially lived acceptance of multiple paths to truth. China, the civilizational competitor. Gurumurthy views China as India's primary challenge, not just territorially, but also civilizationally. Debt trap diplomacy, using predatory lending control strategic assets of the other nations. BRI, correct? So BRI was an initiative to build infrastructure. I think it was I forgot the name itself. Okay. So China was extending loans to a lot of governments to actually build airports, bridges, roads, rail lines, and we see the classic example in Sri Lanka, where the Hambantota port, which was built by Chinese money, and the Sri Lankans could not pay back the debt, and it was taken over by the Chinese for 100 years for a 99-year lease. This is called a debt trap diplomacy, homogenization. The CCP's attempt to crush diversity within its own borders to create a monolithic state. We have to remember that uh, China is a state where the 90% of the people are native Han Chinese. The other people who are not ethnically Han Chinese, they are being discriminated against by the state itself. Strategic threat. The need for India to build strong internal resilience to counter China's outward aggression. We have seen the LOC, line of actual control, in Ladakh and also in Arunachal Pradesh, where Chinese aggression has played a role in the instability in the relation between China and India. And we have seen the Galwan uh, encounter, the Galwan incident, where the Chinese and the Indian forces fought tooth to knuckle with their bare hands to actually fight. So it's a challenge for Bharat. Defining strategic autonomy. So this is a very buzzword in terms of foreign relations, okay, that India exercises strategic autonomy. It is an ally of Americans in the Quad. It is member of BRICS, where China is a kind of an adversary, but they do China is a member of that as well. We also see India is a member of Shanghai Cooperation Organization, where China is the primary player. We see Bharat having free trade agreements with Australia, with New Zealand. A free trade agreement with also EU is on the blocks. So we see the strategic autonomy. India is friends with many people who are enemies of each other. Like China, Bharat has a very good relationship with Russia. Russia is a long-term friend of India. But again, Bharat and US has uh, enmity with Russia, but India is a friends with Russia as well as with America, where India is buying American weapons. So this is called a strategic autonomy. India is a pole, not a satellite. The global triad, the US pole. So we have now like a multipolar world. We have power centers spread across the globe, including the global north and the global south. The US pole, a declining superpower struggling with internal social atomization and debt. Declining superpower, internal social atomization and debt. The 21st century will be defined by the churn within the triangle. These three powers are going to play a very important role in the global security, global stability, and also the economic stability of the whole world itself. The Chinese pole, an aggressive, expansionist, and autocratic civilization state using finance as a weapon. Aggressive and expansionist, autocratic civilization state, weaponized finance. So the BRI initiative was a kind of a weaponization of finance to actually put countries into debt trap and take over their infrastructure, land, grab land in exchange for uh, forgiveness of their debt and loans that they have given. The Indian pole, a rising, democratic, and pluralistic civilization state acting as a stabilizing pole. Rising, democratic, pluralistic civilization state, stabilizing pole. The path forward, the last part. Rise of India is not just an economic event, it is the return of a civilizational mind to global high table. The world needs India's pluralism to balance its own dreams. Atmanirbhar Bharat. I think a lot of people know about the strategic initiative by the government of India to reduce imports, especially on energy, especially on the weapons for these defense forces. So strategic self-reliance. Self-reliance is not isolationism. Very important word to be understood. Self-reliance does not mean that I will not buy anything from outside. Self-reliance is not iso, isolationism. It is about building internal strength to engage with the world from a position of power. Manufacturing. The PLI scheme. The PLI scheme is part of the manufacturing initiative to actually encourage more foreign investment, foreign companies to come in India and set up their shop so that the manufacturing prowess that India had lost, it can be again re-established. Reducing dependencies on hostile supply chains like China, like America, especially in defense and tech. Indigenous systems, development based on native models of agriculture, small and medium scale industries, SME, small and medium scale enterprise clusters, and social capital. National security, the realization that an economically dependent nation cannot remain strategically autonomous. And thank you. So I am going to now stop the presentation. What happened? What happened? It was going correct. I thought you were able to see the presentation. Okay, never mind. We'll do it anyway. We will read the book again in few days. So I'll show the presentation again. Anyway, let me show you a brief of it. Okay, I have one more presentation to show just to and let me know if this is something you can see. Okay, let me see if this works. Hmm. Okay, is the screen now visible? Okay, the path forward. Okay, fine, fine, fine. Then it is fine. I think rest we will actually discuss this the read. Let's then read the book itself, and I will give this presentation at the end of it. So let's read the book. Is as of now. Maybe some might be network issue would be there. So let's read which chapter. Okay. Let's look at the chapter number 5. So the chapter number 5 is the Indian picture, economic, internal security, border issues with China and China-Pakistan axis. I think we are seeing, correct, a lot of threats are coming, a lot of mm, happening in our borders. There's a the eastern border is hot, very hot because of Bangladesh issue, and we see Pakistan also playing a very important role in the over the internal and external security of. So page 178. Okay, chapter 5, the Indian picture, economic, internal security, border issues with China and the China-Pakistan axis. So let's see what Mr. Gurumurthy has to say about this. Commencing from the quarter of 2020, remember in 2029 we had the COVID crisis, COVID pandemic, and COVID pandemic was a kind of a point of reset where a lot of economics, a lot of international politics, geopolitics shifted from its pole during that 2019 COVID pandemic. Commencing from the first quarter of 2020, India has been facing multifarious and intense challenges: external security, internal security, economic issues, geopolitical shifts, and a COVID 19 hit health sector, all at the same time. We do not realize that in 2019 when the COVID-19 hit, the kind of challenges Bharat faced at that time. Never in its history post independence has India faced such comprehensive challenges. What challenges are? These are external security, internal security, economic issues, geopolitical shifts, and COVID 19. So one, two, three, five issues are faced at the same time by a nation. Never in its history post independence has India faced such comprehensive challenges simultaneously. Some of them have far reaching transnational and geopolitical ramifications. It is necessary for us to understand the depth and the impact of these challenges to evolve. Geopolitical ramification, it is necessary for us to understand the depth and impact of these challenges to evolve appropriate strategies for handling them. Any inappropriate way of handling would be a repeat of historic blunders like the idealistic, unrealistic, impractical, and unstrategic handling of neighborhood relations. External security and the internal economic challenges, particularly by the fledgling Free India's government of 1950s and 60s. The author is talking about the non-aligned movement, the communist policies which hindered the economic prospect of this fledgling nation. So when the 2019 in 2020, when the COVID pandemic was at its full blown impact, it was again a time for India to take appropriate steps because the mistakes which made by Mr. Jawaharlal Nehru in 1950s has cost us 40 years of economic growth, stagnation, and geopolitical status, which was a kind of a weak, vulnerable state. It was then now the time for Mr. Narendra Modi led government to actually take appropriate steps to the challenges again faced by Bharat after 1950s. The effect and impact of which the country is enduring even now. The 1950s and 1960s policies which were taken by the Nehru government still impact us today. Namaste, Ninar, Jashiram. Here is an overview of the challenges and the probable responses given the ecosystem in which the country is positioned. While in recent decades both India and China had comparable demographic strength, with China's lead getting narrower in recent times, the West preferred autocratic China over a democratic India purely for growth and profit. While both India and China had demographic advantages, India's democracy was considered a burdensome and difficult to handle, while China's autocracy was considered to be stable and easy to handle. After the reforms initiated by Deng Xiaoping in 1970s and following the death of Mao Zedong, while demography was in favor of both, West had an undisclosed view that democracy was against India. I think we all know about it, correct? That India is the elephant and China is the Chinese dragon. And China has efficiency and India has its bureaucracy to derail every reform that it had initiated. But with the West having burnt their fingers with the autocratic China, it is now turning to a democratic India. Now we are seeing a lot of foreign investment, FIIs, institutions investing large amount of money in the Indian markets. But since 1970s, especially 80s onwards, billions of dollars were invested in Chinese economy. But at the same time, the Indian market was ignored because it was termed difficult to work with. China versus India. Why India only grew when China flew? That's a very important term. Why India only grew? India grew at around 7 to 8%, maybe 7 to 8% at average since 1991 when it was liberalized. When China flew, China was growing at 14, 15%, sometimes 18%. So the China's growth was around 12 to 13% per year, and that was something like flying, where India was growing at a very slow pace. Even it was a very fast paced for a general economy, but China was flying. For those who debate why China and why not India, here is an insight. An article in Forbes magazine 2019 titled Politics, Productivity and Population. Why the Chinese economy flew and India just grew summed up how China surpassed India by a wide margin. It said GDP per capita for China and India in 1985 was approximately 293. So now these are very interesting stats. जर्मन लैंग्वेज imposition नहीं चलेगी. The GDP per capita for China and India in 1985 was approximately 293 per person. So at 1985, the economies of both the countries were almost same. Both had the GDP per per capita income of $293 per person. According to according to 2017 data from the World Bank, China's GDP per capita has ballooned to 8,000 to $8,827, and India has climbed to $1,942. So if you can see, it is almost four times the Chinese number. Both countries have made tremendous progress, but the growth in China has been miraculous. Why such a significant difference? How did China outpace India? The answer lies in the difference between politics, productivity, and population trends. Okay, interesting. Okay, sorry, Dada. Frankly, have no respect for that nation at all. Some of its nationals, yet, yes, who are Hindu, that is. Saying how political factors favored China over India. The article compared the two and said about China. The Chinese Communist Party governs the country with few barriers. When the government decides on a course of action, few obstacles stand in its way. For example, China spent more than a decade building the Three Gorges Dam, the world's largest hydropower project. The massive undertaking displaced more than 1.2 million people and flooded 13 cities, 140 towns, and 1,350 villages. The dam, despite its enormous social and environmental cost, provides China with a source of clean energy and brought thousands of jobs to the Chinese interior. When it comes to rapid development on such a scale, an authoritarian political system is definite advantage. On India, it said India is a democracy. It has regional parliaments and a federal parliament with many assemblies. This system is all inclusive but a nightmare for development. It can take decades to make a decision. For example, it took 16 years for the Indian Parliament to pass a tax reform bill 2016. A project like damming the Yangtze River could not happen in India. So the Yangtze River is also called the Yellow River. So where the Three Gorges Dam is built. So it is saying a project like damming the Yangtze River could not happen in India because of democracy as a bottleneck. Plagued by corruption at all levels, the divided political landscape would kill the project before it began. Politics prevent spending on infrastructure. In comparison to Yangtze project, in China. Look at the Narmada Dam chronology. 1961, Jawaharlal Nehru laid the foundation. 1961, 1979, World Bank agreed to fund it. So, 1961, Jawaharlal Nehru had laid the foundation. 1979, it means almost 20 years it took to get the funding. 20 years. World Bank agreed to fund it. After again almost 9 years, 1987, construction began. 1989, Narmada Bachao agitation started. 1989, again 1995, Supreme Court stayed it after 6 years. 1999, SC allowed constructions up to the height of 88 meters. 2000, it allowed 90 meters. In 2002, it allowed 95 meters. In 2006, it allowed 122 meters. Finally, in 2019, the full height of 139 meters after 48 years. The Yangtze project displaced 1.2 million, while the Narmada project displaced between 60,000 to 150,000. China completed it in a decade, but India took 5 decades. This explains not only why China flew and India only grew, but also why the West preferred to ally with China that could fly and not with India which only could grow. Pretending to bet on China becoming a democracy in the future. The West preferred China over India, always a democracy. So in many of the circles, correct, especially Americans who had invested billions into the Chinese economy, there was a sense of illusion that once China becomes prosperous, so there is a term, there is an economic term, correct? So if a country has $5,000 in terms of per capita income, it has better roads, better health, better infrastructure, and if the country goes beyond $8,000 or $10,000 in terms of per capita income, it transitions into democracy. So they thought, and it was something which was a very concrete idea in the Western academia as well, that when the society becomes rich, it will become democratic automatically as a function of its prosperity. Mm. Okay, Vyom is saying democracy seems bad in all developing nations, and only richer states with old but strong institutions alone can sustain this, although not now given social media. Hmm. Okay, we'll take that question later, and maybe we can come and join and talk to us as well on this. I think, okay, Abhay is saying something. I think similar thing is being carried out in the Aravali case. Yes, it's very muggy and it's not very clear what's happening. So that is correct. That is the confusion which creates and which delays things. But I don't know about the. I've not done about the research on this, so I can't speak on that. But it can be a reality. It can be something happening like this. Pretending to bet on China becoming a democracy in the future, the West preferred China over India, always a democracy. The reason for China's flying rise was that the West, particularly US, found its autocratic order more suitable for the rapid growth of the market and demand which the West and it thought the world needed. The West found autocratic China more comfortable and welcomed it with both hands into the WTO, World Trade Organization, made huge investments in it, and even glorified China as almost an equal power. The intent of the West was more profit oriented than founded on any principle. Profit comes before ideology, including democracy and human rights. So, the champion of democracy, champion of human rights, okay, of principal values of democratic rights to the people. But still, the Western governments, particularly the United States, which calls itself the guardian of human rights, was investing billions into China, where they knew that China was violating human rights on a daily basis. But still, they chose profit over principles. And this is how the world order works. This is how the national interest works. It doesn't work on ideology. It works on profit. It works on real politics. So long as so long as the going with China was good, the West would target India. Now again, very important point. So long as the going with China was good, the West would target India on human rights and completely overlook China on Xinjiang and other human rights violations. The West found India's democracy cumbersome and preferred China in the long term economically, even though the West pretends now that it gambled on the premise that autocratic communist China would head towards and and market, but that failed to materialize. And the Economist magazine, 3rd March 2018, the West had no answers to why it preferred an autocratic China, trusting it became the democracy over India. So the West was only pretending that okay, somewhere down the line, China will become democratic, and they use their academics, their intellectuals to propagate that propaganda or the narrative that soon we are investing now in China and China is autocratic. But soon after China reaches $10,000 of income or maybe $50,000 of income, 50,000, it will automatically become democratic. That's how narrative game is played. But all the way, we know that profit was the primary motive, not anything else, principles. Today, the West and its allies are reworking their maths to decouple from China. Today, the rise of an autocratic China is a nightmare for the West. The West is realizing that discounting India's democracy politically and economically and preferring China's autocracy both was wrong. Having declared China as a systemic adversary, the West and its allies are furiously reworking the math and to cost benefit to decouple themselves from the complex multilateral trade, commercial, financial, and technical architecture they have built with China during the decades of bonhomie, bonhomie with it. The decoupling will mean an ever increasing supply chain shift from China in the coming decade and more, as coupling has taken at least a decade, if not more, to cement. The shift will not be limited to trade and commerce, as the collapse of mutual trust between China and the West and its allies will need comprehensive decoupling touching all aspects of geopolitics, and that perhaps is bound to lead to a change in the world order that is being talked about. Unless China retracts from its aggressive look outside and and regressive phase within, which is more unlikely than likely. So China will not regress, but it will maintain its aggressive posture. The limited medium-term beneficiary of this shift will be India, which being the only comparable replacement for China could also be a huge long-term beneficiary. But this cannot be without equally high short and medium-term risks for both West and India. And it will also involve bureaucratic and policy changes. Important terms: bureaucratic and policy changes. The West, the world, the West and the world need India's democratic polity and demographic strength for growth, stability, and world order. Post World War II order led by the West was founded on the Cold War between socialist and free market nations. which was not exactly the dividing line between democracies and autocracies, as many socialist nations like non-aligned India were democracies, while some Middle Eastern and Latin American nations that are aligned with the West were autocracies. In the Cold War order, the West never regarded India as part of its democratic circle, treating it more as a socialist adversary than as a democracy. In the post Cold War order, that is 2019, 2020 onwards, which was regarded as the success of the free market and liberal democracy over socialism, the West virtually ceased to have any ideological position other than leading the world without opposition. So, after Second World War and after the fall of Soviet Union in 1991, US became the sole superpower, and they have ruled, became the policeman of the whole world. It was not averse to having it was not averse to having and could rationalize having autocratic China as a strategic partner in the trade, economics, and geopolitics. This was because of China's huge demography and regressive autocracy, which was which the West felt was the right combination for faster growth. So regressive democracy and autocratic policies are like a magic formula which West wanted or needed for a rapid growth, which was felt was the right combination for faster growth and not that of India, which though having a comparably huge demography also had a slow democratic polity. Indian demography was branded as an elephant, both for its big size and slow pace. The West and the world needed, let me see. Fine. Sir. The West and the world needed and will continue to need a huge demography to drive its and the world's growth on which its stock market's value rests. In the perception of the West, demography was the strength of both India and China, but it saw autocracy as China's strength and India's democracy as a sign of its weakness. Now, however, it perceives things the other way around. It sees autocratic China as a danger and democratic India as its ally. With the world polity delicately balanced, almost 50-50 between democratic nations of all hues and autocratic countries of all kinds. The huge demographic strength of India and its vibrant democracy are being perceived by the West as necessary for growth, stability, and world order, particularly when it is decoupling from China. The West and the world would not have cared for either China or India had their population been just a tenth of theirs. So birth rates do matter. Birth rates are a fundamental of social and economic stability and growth and also prosperity. Indian democracy and demography in the emerging perception of the West are the right replacement for the Chinese demography and autocracy for the future world order. Several reports and studies that appeared between March and May 2021, which include the UBS Evidence Lab CFO study, the Bloomberg report, the Information Technology and Innovation Fund research, and the Quina report, all of which uniformly pointed to the US and the West shifting from China to India, as will be explained in the detail, detailed later on. In these studies, the report of the Information Technology and Innovation Fund (ITIF) makes extremely significant geopolitical analysis of global shifts and the likely scenarios that may emerge. Describing the worst and the best case scenarios, the IITF report says that in the former, tensions between India and China are reduced, and the many business synergies between these two neighboring nations come to the fore, in which case the heart of the global economy would shift to the east, and there would be little the United States could do about it. In the second scenario, the interests of India and United States become increasingly aligned as the economic, military, and international relations challenges from China grow. In which case, democratic norms could prevail across most of the developed world as developing nations start looking to the Delhi model instead of the Beijing model. Delhi model is the democratic model. Beijing model is the autocratic model. Hmm. Absolutely correct. The TFR, the Sanjeev Sanyal discusses how the West weaponized male child preferences in India to attack its TFR. Absolutely correct. It concluded that in any event, India's tech dependence on India was bound to rise as economic and geopolitical stakes could not be higher. This leads us to the next issue. How should India handle the shifts? India should obviously opt for the best case scenario mentioned in the IITF report, unless it is forced into a worst case scenario by China taking aggressive military measures against it, as the IITF report mentions. India needs to balance between the West and the China. So that strategic independence. Even as the demographically strong India is bound to be courted by the West, and India should not be averse to working with them. Here is a caveat. India needs to avoid risking beyond limits in the being part of such an effort. While the West would endeavor for an alliance of democracies and market economies for building the future world order, half the world will continue to be under autocracies. China, Middle Eastern countries, market economics may overlap between democracies and autocracies. Also, the West continues to regard itself as a Class A liberal democracy and regards other democracies, particularly Indian democracy, as illiberal and Class B democracy. Mm. The West would regard India only for purposes to claim as the G7 nations meeting in June 2021 did that 2.3 billion people are under democracy. If India is excluded, the balance of the West approved democracy is just a billion. Unless there is greater alignment between India and the West beyond accepting India as a statistical purpose, as a democracy, and on quality and equality, and unless the West drops its double standards of judging democracies, democracy cannot be bond between West and India. There will This will call for change in Western perception of ultra individualism. Very important point. As the supreme test of the foundation of liberal democracy. Individualism cannot be the foundational unit of judging a democracy because such perception excludes cultural and civilizational diversities that distinguish different nations and their democracies from the West. Therefore, merely because West welcomed India into a statistical club of democracies, if it agrees to join and gets perceived as anti-China, India would be risking a great deal that would not be in its interest. While India will be beneficiary of global supply chain shifts because of the decoupling taking place between the West and China, India needs to maintain a balance between both by forming strategic relations rather than joining alliances. Alliances are remnants of the Cold War. and no one wants to return to the Cold War. It will not be in India's interest to be part of an explicitly anti-China order. Now, when we were doing the presentation, we thought about strategic autonomy. That is what we are seeing. So, post 2014, the geopolitical, the foreign policy, the economic policies, the strategic partnerships which India is building, is signing agreements from Australia, between Australia, Britain, EU, and also there is also a free trade agreement on the anvil with Canada as well. This is this is the foundation of this specific policy which the Mr. Gurumurthy has advocated. It will not be in India's interest to be part of any explicitly anti-China order, or to have a sworn enemy of China's size and power along its 4,000-kilometer long, treacherous, and mountainous border. India would need strategic trade, economic, and political relations with individual nations, free trade agreements with United States, Canada, New Zealand, Australia. So that is the policy that we are seeing now. So whatever we are seeing now, correct? So these are the policies which are being formed and being worked upon over a long period of time. A free trade agreement takes maybe 10 to 12 years to come into fruition. So whatever we're seeing today is a kind of a policy which was of the government for last decade. India would need strategic trade, economic, and political relations with individual nations which would aspire to work with such a huge demographic, economics, and avoid any treaty with them that would make China their avowed enemy, while being prepared militarily to face any threat from Beijing. India's delicate balancing act is particularly needed because of Pakistan's visceral hatred of it and its willingness to be China's shikhandi. Shikhandi. Hmm. India, on its own, by design or omission, should not invite open enmity with China. A lot of people say why India doesn't give the so-called gali to China every time, because international politics, geopolitics is done with keeping the future in mind, not the present. The first principle of managing adversarial relations is don't declare anyone as enemy. And the next is never allow anyone to declare you as an enemy. Again, I will read these two sentences, very important. What we see today, what we have seen the Indian government stand post 2014 Modi government, specifically on China, China's the Galwan incident, the Pangzhou Lake incident. We have seen a lot of skirmishes between Chinese troops and also Indian troops happening over the past decade. But how we look at it, how the Indian state looks at it in terms of policies for the future. So it mentions the first principle of managing adversarial relation is don't declare anyone as enemy. Do not declare China as an enemy, but we do declare Pakistan as an enemy state. Why the difference in the policy between Pakistan and China? And the next is never allow anyone to declare you as an enemy. Engage with China so that China doesn't have the excuse to declare you as enemy of China. This is foreign policy. This is geopolitics. This is foresight. The first one, the first one is in one's hand. India not declaring China its arch enemy. On the other hand, though the other is not, India cannot just force China to tell, okay, you should not declare me as an enemy. Geopolitics opens up medium to long term Geopolitics opens up medium to long term opportunities for India to gain on India's demographic and democracy. Western nations, for their own strategic reasons, were forced to open up medium to long term opportunities for India like they did for China decades back. How the Western countries, including Europe, including US, had invested billions of dollars in 1980s when 1970s China started liberalizing, and from that onwards, 1980s onwards, there were literally billions and even trillions of dollars were invested in Chinese markets by the European and US US who actually invest. The same thing is now happening with India. India, therefore, needs to take full advantage of these favorable tailwinds that will make her move forward fast. She must realize that the reason for change is that the West needs India. Very important line this is. She must realize that the reason for change is that the Western nations, the European bloc and the American bloc, the North American bloc specifically, West needs India more than the latter would need the former for balancing the world order in favor of democracies which are facing effective competition for power for the first time from autocracies. At this time, in terms of the reset in the global order, the West needs India more than India needs them. It's mutual, but at this time, India maybe can do grow on its own, but Europe and the Americans need need India badly. Autocracies never had legitimacy in post-war global affairs, but thanks to the rise of China, autocracy is gaining recognition. The legitimacy that China provides for autocracy is the real geopolitical issue for the West. Minus India, democratic geography. Minus India, democratic geography. It means nations where democracy is the primary mode of governance. So India has 1.3 billion people, and demography will be in danger of being marginalized if India doesn't join the democratic club. Then China takes over as in terms of numbers. This is an advantage for India. India's policy making must be fully conscious of the fact that it feels con- okay, conscious of the fact that in the fields of trade, finance, economics, technology, the West would need India's youthful demography and transparent market economy for not only its own growth but also the world. India needs to strongly assert, India needs to strongly assert, artfully and gainfully negotiate on the basis of these two civilizational assets of high value, and not to fritter away the high energy flowing from them. So that's where I think correct. So I think for last 1 year and more than 1 year, we are seeing America is trying to sign a free trade agreement with India, but it's never materializes. Why? Because the terms Americans are giving to Indians are not acceptable to India, and the policy is that we have an advantage at this time. In 1980s, the democracy was a disadvantage. It was considered a disadvantage. That's why the billions went to China, as China was an autocracy. But the tide has turned, the churn has happened. Now the Chinese autocracy is a liability for China, and billions of currencies is moving out of China and going into India. So at one time, democracy was a burden. Now democracy is the currency which India can use to actually get a lot of things done, but India needs to play very smartly. Concrete and core national interest must predominate Indian policies and strategies, and not abstract global interest predominating over national. For the last decade, that's been the policy of national interest primary, not any ideological alignment with any other power, whether European or Americans. India must carefully draw up a balance sheet of its strengths and weaknesses, and choose its strategic partners to add to its strength and reduce its weakness. While India's culture and tradition would not allow it to play the cloak and dagger strategic politics of China, it needs to follow Chanakya Niti, in which national interest predominates. India must also align national discourse and debate in accord with its global strategies and not allow domestic political divisions to distort them. Now, a lot of people might tell me, okay, we have seen the UPA 1 and UPA 2 governments from 2004 onwards, and these two terms, UPA 1 and UPA 2, these two terms made sure that India was politically irrelevant. Economically, India was considered the fragile five economies. So the Indian voters voted for an alliance which made India maybe a weak in many aspects, economically and politically, and also geopolitics. But in 2014, the Indian voters changed their mind and they have voted for a alliance which is takes India first policy. Now that was not the policy of the UPA 1 and UPA 2. So when the Indian people are voting, they need to keep in mind that the national interests are paramount. The petty politics of internal politics will go on, but the voters needs to be mindful of whom they are voting for. If you're going to vote for a free bus ride, then you will have illegals, illegal aliens given flats by taxpayers' money. So be wise whom you vote for. This practical and strategic approach is necessary till India can gain enough from global changes before it enables itself to give it back to the world. Economic issues, India's medium long term prospects. India's current economic issues are indeed compounded by the marginal performance of its economy. Even before the COVID 19 pandemic, with the unforeseen huge socio political and economic toll that the pandemic imposed, adding further pain. Undoubtedly, India will have extensive short term economic issues complicated by COVID 19 induced health issues, but in the medium term, India will gain the advantages which it lacked and which China had over it for the last 2 decades. In the long run, India is likely to gain advantages which China may lack. The medium and long term advantage which India will gain has much to do with how the world, particularly the West, looks at China in comparison to India. This is the medium and long term advantage which India has been awaiting for 2 decades. India's GDP growth before the pandemic had hit a low of 4.5%, and during the pandemic year 2020-21, it turned hugely negative to minus 7.3% when the economy shrunk. And that happened first time in decades. When the economy began rising, a tsunami like second wave hit, and the damage and the damaged India several times worse than the first. That virtually wiped out the recovery India had began making from the third quarter of 2020 and threw it back. But With the second wave abating, the GDP for the first quarter of fiscal 2021-22 was estimated by the Reserve Bank of India to grow by 22%. But that is on the low base of the pandemic hit quarter. Remember, it was minus 7.3. So it bounced back to 22%. But overall in terms of quantity, it was not that much. With the GDP growing at 8.7%, it was estimated that India would be back to where it was at the end of 2019-20, which meant that COVID-19 made us add more a rupee to our GDP. The burden of loss of growth, which hit small businesses and the poor, had to be substantially borne by the government by way of relief measures, which damaged India's fiscal position and increased the government debt from 51.6% to an expected 61.7% by the end of fiscal 2021-22. Success of Success of Indradhanush COVID-19 vaccine mission. If there was any hope today of overcoming the pandemic and the achieving faster economic recovery, it was the extraordinary success of the Indradhanush mission of the government to, to indigenously produce the anti-COVID vaccine. Anti-COVID vaccine producing nations and pharma giants are few, but almost 7 plus billion people the world over, of which one sixth is in India, needed the vaccines. For India to get vaccines from outside in the past, it has taken not years but decades after the pandemics broke out. Given the past experience of depending on the world to supply vaccine against pandemics, it would not have been possible for India to get anti COVID vaccines from outside for 100% of its population for decades. Our experience has been that it has taken 40 years to vaccinate 100% of India with imported vaccines, and we could not start vaccinating our people even after others had completed vaccinating others. India daring to take the challenge and its success in developing the vaccine has put her in a different club in the pharma world and in geopolitics. It also became a real and declared global test for the very idea of Atmanirbhar Bharat, which was declared by government when the pandemic hit the world. The government had actually taken a huge risk in saying it would produce indigenous vaccines, as had it not achieved it within and outside India, it would have become a laughing stock. Now, with the development of at least five indigenous vaccines, the world looks at India with awe, as long back she had been written off in the branded drug market after China began to dominate it. Thanks again to the West. Against this background, when the Indian government conceptualized and drove the idea of indigenous vaccines, no one within India or outside believed India could do it. India has now vaccinated over a billion. So, this we are talking about in 2021-22 period. India has now vaccinated over a billion people in the aggregate. This huge leap, which is almost the best in the world in terms of vaccinated populations, would not have been possible but for indigenous vaccine development. Before the onset of the second wave, India had exported 66 million vaccine doses, which it had which it had to stop due to the harsh second wave. Nature magazine says that the world needs around 11 billion doses of fully vaccinated 70% of the world's population against COVID-19. But more than 80% of the doses had gone to high income and upper middle income countries, and only 1% for people in low income countries have been given at least one dose. Given these hard facts about vaccine availability, distribution, and administration, had India not developed its own vaccine, the question that surfaces is what would have been India's vaccination program on which its economic recovery depended. The COVID 19 infection rate can be seen inversely proportional to the vaccination rates. Unless the vaccination rate was expedited, expedited, there was no way the infection could be contained, and unless infection was contained, the economy could not recover. It means economic recovery is directly proportional to the vaccination rate. In short, had India not produced the vaccine and ramped up the rate of vaccination, there could have been no hope for short-term or medium-term recovery. 2 3 year medium term outlook. The medium term outlook for India's economy seems strong for the various reasons, domestic and global. Medium term growth prospects are led by exports, pent up demand of the period manifesting in the current year, rise in startups, IPOs and FDI, huge global shift, and other favorable factors. The Indian economy has undergone several major reforms in 6 years, some of which certainly were shocks that affected growth in the short term. Demonetization, GST, digitization, Jan Dhan Yojana, and direct benefit transfer, and Mudra credit, to name a few. Demonetization, Jan Dhan Yojana, direct benefit transfer were major reforms which made GST possible. But all this meant closing closing wrong ways for the doing business and governance. That also affected growth as informal funds generated by wrong activities. Okay, interesting. This is very interesting point. Demonetization, Jan Dhan Yojana, and direct benefit transfer were major reforms which made GST possible. But it also meant closing wrong ways of doing business and governance. The It means about the black money or the unaccounted money which was generated by bribes, by many other illegal or unethical means. That also affected growth as informal funds generated by wrong activities, criminal, hawala, money laundering, all those things were funding were funding MSME, medium scale MSMEs, which got starved of funds on one side and on the other. GST too suddenly attempted to formalize informal business and formal funding for that sector, which did not match their needs. This certainly affected growth, but that was the cost to pay for the extensive formalization of the huge informal economy. But before the economy could fully benefit from the transition from informal to formal mode of business, the pandemic struck, which added to the pain of deep reforms. Also, throughout of gear the entire range of economic activities. There are clear and positive indications that the Indian economy is gaining momentum. Some pointers are exports rise. The rising exports, in which the impact of the global shift is also seen, tend to indicate its emerging role in the short and medium term growth prospects of India. The exports of the first quarter. Okay, I think we can skip this chapter because this is may not be as relevant. Okay. And let me see some interesting parts which we can read, because maybe we can read one more chapter, a little bit of it. I think this part we can read. External challenge two. Okay, where is external challenge one? I can get that. Okay, India internal security issues. In a statistical term of number of attacks and casualties, India's internal security has improved in the last 6 to 7 years. The incidents have come down from 523 in 2014 to 299 in 2020 to 206 in 2021 so far. The fatalities have halved from 1012 in 2014 to 591 in 2020. to 375 in 2021 so far. Civilian casualties have come down in three-fourths from 400 in 2014 to 106 in 2020 to 70 in 21 so far. Casualty of security forces has come down from 167 in 2014 to 106 in 2020 to 75 in 2021 so far. The number of insurgents killed has also come down marginally from 441 in 2014 to 385 in 2020 to 230 in 2021. So far, suicide attacks have become rare. External challenges: 1. Motives of China's moves at the border and outside to make India a political risk and undermine its value as a safe alternative to China. Remember, when the West, especially Europe and American governments and policymakers, took a decision that an autocratic China and aggressive China is not good for the Western alliance, for the Western world, they took that initiative to decouple from China and invest building relationship, economic, geopolitical relationship with India. Then China had to react. And how China would react? China would make the border hot, especially the eastern and the western borders in Ladakh and also in Arunachal. And we have seen that happen in Galwan, where the fist fight took place between the Chinese and Indian troops. So this is the external threat to Indian economy. Talks between India and China to unlock the Ladakh border standoff following the unprovoked violent clashes initiated by China in June 2020. Efforts by Chinese and the Indian army officials, aided by diplomatic initiatives to ease border tensions, have been painfully slow process. But despite distrust and apprehensions on the Indian side about the China's intentions of engaging in the adventure, some de-escalation seems to be taking place. According to the latest reports, India and China had completely withdrawal of forces from the Gogra region of the eastern Ladakh after a year-long sensitive standoff. The disengagement, which included both sides removing all temporary structures and other associated infrastructure and returning the landform to its pre-standoff state, is reported to have taken place in August 2021. With Gogra Agreement, and India and China have now concluded agreements in four of the six flashpoints: Galwan, the north and south banks of the Pangsong Lake, and Gogra, Depsang and Hot Spring are still locked in a stalemate and are the most sensitive areas in subsector north from the point of view of India's security. While China strategically keeps the talks going, its intentions seem to be deeper and complicated. The idea seems the idea seems to be not to ease the tension but to keep it on, and that benefits China strategically. So that's an important part of it. China's motives at the border are not so much to assert its border rights as to keep the mind, the time, and efforts of India occupied and kept away from a full thrust on critical issues, including internal security and economic development. We can take a cue from this: what's happening today in Bangladesh or East Pakistan. Hi Rishabh. So how the external geopolitics works. China keeps the border hot whenever it wants, so that the India's energy, the government's energy, is focused on that part, but rather than on the economic growth and also on internal security, because you have limited resources. You cannot spend all of it on the border. So what's happening in right now in Bangladesh is also a kind of a same kind of situation, where the American deep state is lighting fire, is pouring oil and lighting fire to the eastern border in Bangladesh, and also we need to see that There's also American presence in Myanmar, and they have put the petrol and put the fire in the Bangladesh, so that the Indian economic growth story and also the strategic interest, the long-term, mid-term strategic interest of India are getting stalled in the meantime. Remember that there is a corridor being built as part of the Look East policy, where the from Calcutta, from Kolkata to the northeastern states, to Myanmar and Thailand. There's a corridor being built where the economic integration of Southeast Asia with India is going to take place. So that is part of the Look East policy, which was there in 2000 onwards when Vajpayee was in power. But this burning Bangladesh puts a hold to this Lookist policy, where you have India is building the IMAC corridor. The IMAC corridor is built where from Chennai and Mumbai ports there will be sea, land, sea rail links between the Indian coast, the Israeli ports, and it will go towards the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, and that place. And there's a one more economic link which is being built, integration with Southeast Asia, including China itself, the land part. Okay, Rishabh. Okay, Rishabh has one interesting point. Also, if you spend on defense in the mountain, you cannot focus on the Andaman. Absolutely correct. And the Andaman base is very important strategically and also economically, because the economic might of Singapore is because of its location and the port. And if India can be a kind of a alternative to Singapore port, then the economics is outweighs everything else. Yes, that's called the IMAC corridor. But very importantly, see, remember, uh, the distance between Kolkata and Bangkok is 2.5 hours by flight. And if you remove China, you have markets of Malaysia, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos, and these are highly dense populations. So for the growth of the eastern side of India, from the eastern side of the northeast itself, northeast and Kolkata and Bihar, all these areas, they need this access to the markets of the Southeast Asian nations to become economically viable and prosperous. And for this, and that's why you see the Bangladesh is being burning for, they have lit fire to this place so that this integration can be stopped. Okay. Hmm. China's motives at the border are not so much to assert its border rights as to keep the mind, the time, and efforts of India occupied and kept away from the full thrust on critical issues, including internal security and economic development. The highly split Indian, again, this is a very important part. The highly split Indian politics is also encouraging and helping the Chinese in their efforts. Interesting coded language. The highly split Indian politics is also encouraging and helping the Chinese in their efforts. Whom the author is referring to? You can take a guess. Assisted by an army of wolf warriors engaged by China in and outside India. Hmm. To distort the Indian discourse on both China and on the border. So, for the context, when the Ladakh uh, conflict happened between the Chinese and Indian troops, there was few politicians, I would not name them, few politicians who had spread the rumors that India has given away thousands of kilometers of land to China in Ladakh. So when the author is talking about the highly split Indian politics is also encouraging and helping the Chinese in their efforts. Who are the politicians who are doing this? Assisted by an army of wolf warriors engaged by China, propaganda, and foreign money being paid to people in India to actually further Chinese propaganda and Chinese interests in and outside India to distort the Indian discourse on both China and on the border. To understand why China is causing tensions on Indian borders, it is necessary to know what China's global game is and how a rising India is connected to that game. Yes. Yes. China's game is global. It has issues with different nations, not just with India. Its competition is with the West, particularly the US. China feels India is a regional challenge to its supremacy, and indeed it is. A rising India is more often impediment to China because its legitimacy, which China lacks. India, democratic, non-aggressive, is in the eyes of the most nations more legitimate than China, which they see as autocratic and aggressive. Xi Jinping's China has been trying to play a positive global role, showcasing BRI project and offering and making investment in other countries to overshadow and overcome the disadvantage of its autocratic and aggressive image, which Western powers were doing during the Cold War period. This has been paying off for China in the last few years, with many countries, even Italy, the European country, joining the BRI project to the to the charging to the charging of the West. China has certainly gained a lead over not only India but also divided the West. And taking advantage of the stress of the Western nations since 2008 crisis, a, a presumptuous China has begun perceiving its own single-party autocracy and the oxymoronic Marx and market cocktail. Interesting. The autocracy and the oxymoronic Marx and market cocktail as a global alternative to the Western concoction of liberal democracy and market society, which it regards as failing and not successful model for the world. I think post 2020, mm, and even before post pre 2020, China had invested billions into narrative, into funding academics, sending its students, giving loans to actually legitimize the autocratic way of ruling as a very legitimate way to actually provide prosperity, provide jobs, economic growth, strategic autonomy, military power to as a kind of model to actually replicate rather than the model of democracy, liberal democracy, and market-driven economy. Mm. Correct, correct, correct. This is a serious and dangerous game from which China does not seem to have a retreat option. So China's wolf warrior diplomacy is very famous. Now it has been toned down, but 2020 or pre-2020, it was a kind of a Chinese policy, foreign policy arm, the so-called wolf warrior policy. In the in the kind of risk China has taken to position and push itself ahead of even the West, India is not presently a challenge to China militarily or economically. Why then? Why then is the Chinese army at India's borders? It is certainly not to reinforce its border claim by forcibly redefining it. The border dispute, which has been hanging for decades since before 1962 war, needs no urgent army action. The reason why China is at India's doorstep is because of the change in Western perception. Nothing happens in international politics, geopolitics without a reason. Why the Chinese army was at the border of India in 2021? Because of the West perception of India as a credible alternative to China in terms of its democracy and in terms of its market access. In Western perception about China, that it is more safe with it and is looking at India as a safe alternative, as also a change in China's worldview that the time has come for it to shed its reservations of becoming a global power for which India may be an impediment, if not a competitor. China does not see India as a military threat in the short or long term, but given the challenges in the challenge, given the changes in the West West core China, it certainly would see India as a medium to long term economic competitor. Therefore, it has to undermine India as a safe and peaceful destination for those seeking alternatives to China. China might not mind other nations growing, but not India. As given the latter's demographic size and quality, its size might well provide prejudicial might prove prejudicial to China's interest. Therefore, with Pakistan at the Therefore, with Pakistan at its back and called to work with it, China's moves at the border seem to be calculated to create the threat of a possible two-front war against India that will increase political risks in the minds of countries and investors seeking out India as an alternative to China. In short, China would not want India to be a safe alternative to it in the calculations of other countries, particularly Western countries. But China's efforts to disturb India on the border and otherwise may also prove to be its undoing. It's a dicey game China played because China doesn't want a war with India. But if India takes the bait and fights a war with China, then China's economic prosperity, economic power and muscle, which they have built over 3 to 4 decades, would be vanish in one war. So it's a game of cat and mouse which China had played at that time. But China's efforts to disturb India on the border and otherwise may also prove to be its undoing. In its own interest, China should work for the best case scenario described in the ITIF report cited earlier, namely that if there is reduction in the tensions between the two, China and India, the many business synergies between these two neighboring nations come to the fore, in, in which case the heart of global economy would shift to the east and there would be little the United States could do little could do about it. That will be the rise of East and the decline of the West, which Xi Jinping has talked about. In case of tensions between the two, the ITIF said the interest of India and United States will become increasingly aligned as the economic, military, and international relations challenges from China grow. In which case, democratic norms could prevail across most of the developed world as developing nations start looking to Delhi model instead of the Beijing model. It may not be it may not be its own interest for China to have tense relations with India. President Xi seems to realize this for he advised the PLA senior echelons along similar lines after his first visit to India in 2014, during which the PLA had intruded into Kumar. On the other hand, India has to give deep considerations to its China policy, which is no more in substance a bilateral one. So, the China India relations is not a bilateral, it has a third dimensions, the perspective of European and American powers. Even though India has overcome its psychological disadvantage of the 1962 war setback, China's vast military and economic growth and emotional loyalty of Pakistan to China makes India's position unenviable in external, even internal security in Kashmir and elsewhere through Islamic identity. The strategy of China seems to be simply to keep the Damocles, Damocles sword of war act, or even beyond the border, and the possibility of two-front war hanging over India, so as to keep India's mind occupied with the threat and thereby bargain with India not to move too close to the West. When we call correct 8D chess, 4D chess, 3D chess, this is the chess which is being played at the international geopolitical level. In the past decade, more In the past decade and more, India has always bilaterally managed its issue with China, but of late it has been increasingly drawn into the complicated China versus the West issues, and India has to keep guard to make sure that the China-India relations be only remain bilateral, not no third party should come into play. While China has while China has a Pakistan to use as its shikhandi, the famous proxy warrior of Mahabharata, who sidetracked the mighty Bhishma while Arjuna targeted him as his main adversary as a proxy warrior against India. India has no such proxy warrior to sidetrack China. India can play the Tibet card, but unfortunately, they are not playing it. But yes, India has one more card which they have played quite well in actually Myanmar. So India shares a border with Myanmar, and the troops who are near the Indian border, especially the Arakan army, Arakan that region. So China controls Myanmar, the central government, but the Indian influence is still there in Myanmar, close to the border regions. Mm, we will discuss this. Okay. I will just finish this part, and then I will open up the stream for the audience to come and discuss and talk to us. You can just read this last part of it. Therefore, while entering strategic relations with the West, which has declared China as a systemic competitor, India needs to be careful, if not risking open enmity with China by its own commission or mission. If China openly chooses to declare India an enemy, that is a different matter. But India should not implicitly or expressly do so. India should consciously be part of Asia in culture and geopolitics, and not part of the West. India should be more in tune with China's neighboring Asian nations. Again, the look east policy. This line is very important when we are reading this. That is a difference matter, but India should not explicitly do so. India should consciously be part of Asia in culture and geopolitics, and not part of the West. India should be more in tune with China's neighboring Asian nations. India doesn't have a whom Pakistan equivalent whom it can play against Chinese, but India can, by extending its geopolitical influence, its trade, its economic relations with China's neighbors. Who are China's neighbors? Cambodia, Myanmar, Thailand, Asian nations which face an adversarial China, Philippines, China, and not adopt the stance and policies of nations geographically distant, which have declared China a systemic adversary. In his famous treatise, uh, Sukraniti, Shukracharya says, one should not declare anybody to be one's enemy, nor oneself be enemy's enemy. How the two giant neighbors handle their relations in the medium term will decide the geopolitical ecosystem of the world and also future of the rule based geopolitical and economic order which has sustained the world after the Cold War. So we will finish the reading here. So people who want to join the stream, the link is there in the members only post for people to come and discuss if you want, or else I will some take some comments. Now let me see. Hmm. This was a good question from Vyom. I think how many we have read? Okay, we have one more guest already joined. Others who want to join, do join us. If you want to talk to us, the link is available on the members only post. So do support us by becoming a member if you wish to talk to us and hear more from us. Hi, Ninar. Ninar, you are on mute. You have to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Hello. Yes, I can hear you. Ninar, are you
Yeah, so I was,
speaking?
we were discussing many points of this.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Right, right. Yeah, we were discussing many points in the comment section also
Hmm,
about
hmm,
how
hmm, hmm,
individualism and the culture is fundamentally different from ours in the West,
hmm.
and how their society basically encouraged that. You can say the state itself encouraged the individualism there. I saw in
Ah.
another interview, S.
Hmm, hmm,
Gurumurthy
hmm,
itself, he told that
hmm, 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 hmm,
um, the way the social contract there is that
hmm, hmm,
in 1960s or 70s, the
hmm,
American government told its people that you need to stop. You don't need to care for your families and like elders or any children that much anymore. And in place, you should pay a social security tax, and from that tax,
hmm,
the government itself will take care of your people. So that leaves like no responsibility on the individual. Everyone is
hmm,
only responsible for themselves. That is
hmm.
where individualism, and he points that as the fall of U.S. hegemony also.
Uh, yes. So I think I think in let's say in the 1950s even correct US the US and Europeans had a good family structure. I think it was only in post Second World War due to lack of labor these things were introduced. But there are many reasons behind this as well. But one reason the women were had to go and work because there were not enough people to work in the factories.
Right.
So there's also an economic part a part of it. But yes,
And
so the
also,
fundamental difference.
they used,
Go ahead.
they had to make women work during the war also. They needed as many hands as possible, right? So they put many
Hmm.
women in factories or other kinds of work also during the war itself.
Yes, yes, yeah. Hi, Rishi.
या नमस्ते दादा नमस्ते नीरव और ऑडियंस को भी
Namaste.
नमस्ते
Namaste.
Yeah, you
हाँ
have
प्लीज
some
आप लोग
great
बोलिए
points and very.
वाना हियर यू
I
अच्छा
have spoken enough. Let's see
ओहो
what you have to
ट्रू
say.
ट्रू
Yeah, Nina,
हाँ
go ahead.
Right, Rishi, anything you have to say about this individualism thing, which I pointed out?
हाँ so I just missed some portions of it right now while joining but before that I did hear you about how uh, US government actually endorsed this did they do it as a government policy like in 60s like was
But
it a directive
which one? Which policy you're
the
talking
that
about?
that whole policy which Nina talked about
One child,
how
Ah, that is what
one.
they
Ch-
So in
Go ahead,
that
go ahead, go
video
ahead.
which I saw of S. Gurumurthy himself, in that same video, he talks about how in 60s they bought about some social security act or something. I think it's called Medicare. From then on, uh, people basically began to rely as a safety net as the government instead of the safety net being the family. That is where, and from after that point, other countries started copying and all. But yeah, he according to him, that is the starting point.
Wow. So basically, because the individual was taken care of by the government, so there was no need at all for the family to have as a safety net, I guess. Wow, amazing kind of policy.
Yeah, but
Well, it's
it's interesting that we need to understand like uh, what prompted this policy change, like like why it was introduced, like reason be.
isn't it because
So
I don't know,
you
it's
know,
just my conjecture.
in Germany, this
Hmm.
thing like there is a certain law in Germany which
Nina, you are breaking, your voice is breaking.
80s and 90s itself they started.
Nina,
Okay, okay.
Rishi, are you able to hear Nina? Because I think his voice is breaking.
Yeah, his voice was kind of breaking. Maybe now he can speak, and
Nina,
I guess
can
it would
you
be
just
okay.
My connection is not
repeat?
so good. You guys
Okay,
can
anyway,
speak.
let's try. Yeah, okay, okay. Then Rishi, you have something to say regarding the whatever Nina is saying.
No, I just a conjecture that
Hmm.
maybe because the state always is afraid of communities and structures which are independent of its influences, and therefore it always tries to create a sort of incentive so that those structures always break down to the most weakest possible fundamental, if you could say so. So that is, I guess, that individual thing. That's the most vulnerable section of society, right? It has nothing, literally. It is totally. What should I say? It has no strings attached. It's a very bad word, but yeah, no strings attached at all. Completely floating in the air kind of a object, which can be forced into any direction possible. So I guess all that the state wanted was to create such sort of individuals and then manipulate them into various movements or crowds whenever time was required, right? What do you think? Any counterpoints or any
Uh,
points that you have?
See, I think one is correct in a democratic setup. Correct. In a democratic setup, you will have that problem because,
True,
like, politicians would always want like a vote bank whom they can depend upon as a they will vote for them time and time again. So, like, and we see, correct, we have seen. So it was a kind of like it's like a bribe to people. Why you should vote for me?
hmm,
Because no, I am giving you these facilities.
true,
So I am
true,
giving you, so vote for me. So in that context, like, see, every political system or any uh, system of governance will have its pros and cons. So democracy has that problem,
true, true.
and that would be there. So that is also one part of it.
Mm. Indeed, indeed. Uh, that
Yeah,
incentive
Niner,
structure always. Mm. Kind of, please.
Niner, yes, continue your
So
point. I think you made a
as
very
far as
interesting point.
can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me correctly?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
go ahead, go
So
ahead.
as far as I know, this idea of social security it started around the time of industrialization. So when factories, mining, all that thing kind of started, a lot of people were like physically handicapped after the working in the mines or after working in dangerous factories and all. So from for that kind of insurance, social security started. I think first in Germany only it started.
mm,
Then after that, it began expanding to everything, and it
mm.
this became an excuse so that the state can bring more and more dependents or as a vote bank into their politics. That is when also at the same time voting rights also were being expanded to the whole population. So to you can say to bring the new vote bank, you expand the social security to them also. Like that, it kind of went on expanding, and that's why the oldest democracies are in Europe, and they also have the most social security. You can say for the same reason. In US,
That's an
it was
interesting point.
like as Smriti was saying, it was
I think Nina is having some issues. Yeah, Rishi, uh, I want you to actually elaborate this point. What do you mean by this?
You've seen this, right? Like in the I like I do not like to use this word, but it's used very much by the racists in Western countries. So the third
Hmm,
world,
hmm,
aka the post-colonial.
hmm, hmm, hmm.
Okay, Ninad is back.
The correct,
Okay, the
correct,
third.
correct. The A grade democracy and B grade democracy you're talking about. The book talks about.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The post-colonial societies which adopted this democratic means of governance, basically.
Hmm,
So these
hmm,
sort of
hmm,
nations, the
hmm.
third world, it
Hmm.
seems the democracies in these set of countries never could sustain itself. Either they went into total dictatorship, like in Cambodia or like in
Or
various
in
other
correct,
countries. I am not
even in Africa, correct. In Africa had a
Africa.
very bad
Yeah,
side.
yeah,
When they were given independence, they went back to juntas, army rule, basically.
yeah. True. Absolutely, absolutely. Liberia's case, so many.
Hmm, hmm.
Like Africa's case is one of the deadliest ones. So yeah, so these countries, I guess we are the exception, as Professor Babones also say. He says, right, we are the only legitimate democratic country in the third world, so-called, like among the post-colonials. Anyway, so in these countries where people were too poor and governance structures were not that robust, it was corrupt, weaker institutions were there. uh, these countries could not sustain themselves for long, as far as democracy is concerned, whereas the countries, the ones, the first world, who were richer, who were industrialized, who had better institutions, they alone were the ones to sustain this kind of governance system. And right now, we are seeing even that is getting somewhat uh, shaky because of social media. Many of them say so, at least. But still, there is a uh, what should I say? Some sort of democracy, uh, at least at appearance. Also, there is that. It's not totally a dictatorship or an oligarchy, out and out. Like Russia is an oligarchy, right? Many say that it's a false system of governance and all. It's a conjecture the Westerners make. Let's posit it as such. So that was the point I wanted to make. So why is it that only the poorer countries are unable to sustain democracy, who are also very uh, like gung ho about holding on to it, and vice versa over there? Yeah.
Okay, got it. I got your question now. So see, when Mr. Gurumurthy actually talks about this, let me actually show you the presentation. I think that will also answer a lot of questions as well. I have one more presentation ready. Mm. So this is, see, India is defined as an inclusive civilization that faces paradoxes of tolerance. Okay. So it's- if that point is addressed here. Okay, here it is. The core philosophy. When you are talking about the what do we say, developing countries, okay, developing countries, not developed countries, India's democracy is not a 1947 construct but an ancient pluralistic traditions. It balances individual rights with community duties, dharma. Practical application. Gurumurthy refers to Ayodhya Ram Mandir as a symbol of civilizational rise, not just religious, but a reassertion of living civilization after centuries of colonially imposed amnesia. So, when you are asking this question, why it's sustained? Because the okay, this is also an interesting thing. So, a contrarian view as well, but we accept all kinds of views. So when you're talking about Rishi, that yes, the democracy that is prescribed as a pill or as a medicine to actually cure a society, that cure itself is wrong, because they they consider liberal democracy as one size fits all. Okay, for a Japanese person, for a Chinese person, for a Thai person, correct, they cannot just give away their culture, tradition, mode of worship, because they want to be called as uh, liberal democracies. So this one size fits all culture or perspective, that okay, the way the Europeans or Americans have defined democracy, that is the gold standard. If you go below that, you are not a democracy anymore. That's why it has failed, because as an idea, same thing, correct. I also talk about it when it comes to libertarian, correct. The libertarian policies are good examples of free market access, of entrepreneurship to there. So now what will happen is that those libertarian policies, those policies of capitalism, entrepreneurship, has to be adapted and culturally assimilated to the existing traditions, existing uh, mode of moral values. Only then they will be able to amalgamate and succeed. The problem was that Western democracies, the way they formulated, they want to impose that pill, and it should be taken by everybody. That cannot happen. When you have Middle East, Asia, in Asia and Japan, China, India, even Russia, where they have their own cultures, which are 1,000-year-old civilizations. They can't just accept one fine morning, one person, one country comes and says, okay, this is something you need to accept. That's why it doesn't happen that way. And also, correct, the culture of Middle East, the culture of Africa is very different. So that's why it has never worked and never will work again. Yes, Rishi.
Yeah, so your point is that because of the ignorance about past timelines and the cultures.
Superiority, correct. See,
Mm,
this
mm,
it also comes from, correct, Abrahamic thing, correct. In the Abrahamic concept, correct. So the West has an Abrahamic concept of black and white, that I
mm,
can be right, you can be wrong, you can be wrong, I can be right. So because West thinks I am always right, but
mm,
in
mm,
the Bharatiya philosophy, in the Bharatiya tradition, correct, you can worship Shiva, you can worship Ganesha, correct, you can worship Ma Durga, Ma Kali, all are acceptable, correct? We are not telling कि if you worship Ma Kali, you are a lesser Hindu than me. But in the Abrahamic concept, if you do not accept God, you are not a good person. You are a bad person. You are a black guy. Correct? You are a black person. You are in the bad books of God. So that's where it
Mm.
comes from. So that's why the liberal democracy, the way it's framed by the Western nations, will never work and has not worked. In India, it has worked because pluralism is part of the ethos, the tradition of thousands of years. We have coexisted with multiple cultures, multiple traditions, multiple mode of worship and panth. That's why it works here. With an
True, true,
economy with a
true.
per capita income of $2,000, we are a democracy because we are a 5,000-year-old civilization, not because we have accepted the liberal democratic principles as our own. That illusion the West needs to let go.
Okay, so I had another question on this.
Hmm.
You both can actually comment on this much more. Uh,
Hmm.
there is also this tendency within the Westerners to
Hmm.
like certify democracies, right? So which is a good and a bad democracy. So when it says
Hmm.
that India is a bad democracy, one of the things that it also says it not so clearly enough, but there is an implication.
Hmm.
You do not have great respect or a very good civil society, quote unquote.
Hmm.
This concept of a civil society, could you just elaborate it a bit for the audience and also me, both of you, if you could?
Yes, Nina, you want to speak? Let's see, Nina, if you want, if I have to say something. Okay, Nina is has a problem with network. Okay, Nina, go ahead. Let's see your stake.
Uh, so his question was about social spaces, right? Or so
Yeah,
concept of society.
why we need a why no no why we need a civil society, like why there has to be a civil society, or else
Civil
you cannot be a
society.
democracy. Then Nina, again you have a
From what I
network issue.
understand, this civil society is kind of an aristocracy of the modern times, nothing else.
Mhm. Gatekeepers, you want to say.
Correct. They decide the
Okay.
morals of the times, the standards,
Hmm. Hmm.
everything.
Hmm. Hmm. So the elites, correct? So the West thinks that okay, the elite. So India has to provide like the legitimacy of the democracy of India has to be provided by the civil societies who are elites of the society, or the creme de la creme. Yeah. So clearly, see, democracy, the way it is been formed, correct? So it is a kind of a like it's a tool. It's like those institutions and those benchmarks, those processes which they have devised to actually give A grade democracy, B grade democracy. Correct. These are all actually tools of the government, okay, or government for European Union to actually extract what we say, extract policy policy concessions. So take an example, give an example. So there, when Donald Trump came into India in 2020, you had the Shaheen Bagh protest, where people were sitting in protest against CAA. Now, with that protest, minorities are in danger. Correct? So this is part of a whole system of levers which the West has created to actually corner India and get something done in favor of them. That could be buying weapons. Correct? Let's say they are having a deal to buy weapons. So they will use these civil society or freedom of index, democratic index to actually tell them, okay, I will uh, demean you in the global arena if you do not give us a better deal on buying weapons. So these are tools. They are not democracies at all, and that is being now exposed by Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal, the one of the members of the Economic Advisory Committee. So this is all part of a greater game of geopolitics. It has nothing to do with your democracy as such.
True, true, true. Because this whole game of civil society, I have seen this being played in India, especially because it seems like they have this whole, what should I say, whole scheme that, okay, we had from the 19th century onwards, we had created the so called pliable class, to quote, interlocutor, to quote Lord Macaulay. He will be the civil society, uh, the elite, the, as Nina said, aristocrat, uh, English educated and all, English by morals, English by taste, so on and so forth. And this class hasn't got the respect, especially under the current dispensation, and therefore this current dispensation is not conducting a very good democracy right now in this state, in this country. And apparently it's what do they say, autocratic, electoral autocracy or something, some weird wordplay they
Dictatorship,
do. Okay.
dictatorship
Oh,
kind
yeah,
of
yeah, electoral
democratic
dictatorship. Yeah, yeah.
dictator. Yeah.
Two exclusives in a sentence. What an amazing way of suggesting logical fallacies. Indeed. Well, that's the genius of West, I guess. So yeah, so this game has been played, right, till now, and how to counter this? What do you think?
See the counter. The the point. The first counter needs to be decolonize the mind, because the base of this is the education system, which actually creates these brown slaves that people come out when they go out of school. So decolonizing the mind is the number one step which needs to be taken, so that, because correct, if you want to put a narrative in the people's head, you need to tell the kid from class 1 to class 10 onwards that how how bad your ancestors were, how bad your religion is. Okay, you are good for nothing, we have done everything for you, we gave you railways, we gave you administration, we gave you modern soaps to actually wash your hands, we gave you hygiene. Correct. So this is the foundation, the fertile ground on which you can actually create an artificial elite, and that elite, the brown side, will tell them these people what to do and how to think and how to behave. So the first thing is education. Decolonize the education, decolonize the mind. Okay. Symbolically or in any other ways. Only then these elites who are funded and enabled by the Western society will lose their relevance, and they will be asked counter questions. Why you are not talking about pollution, talking about green gas emissions on New Year's Eve, on Christmas, about of environmentalism, when there are millions of trees being cut for Christmas, but you only have a problem with Diwali as what you say here, as a cause for concern for environment and pollution. So until there has been lot has happened, but lot needs to be happen.
True, true, true. It's a slow process, I guess, and it will take some of the generations, and maybe we will see that in
Yeah,
future.
it's a slow process. It's a slow process anyway, but everybody has to play a part and role in this.
Indeed, indeed, that's true. Any more questions that came up on comments? What do you
No,
think?
I think you had given some. Let's see. You had so you had mentioned this thing you had when individual is made fundamental and sacred, it leads to generalization regarding key issues like moral, society, and governance. Absolutely correct. So that is the difference. Like we have somewhere down the line adopted the Western standard as the primary gold standard.
True, true, true. I mean, I think uh, Abhay has said here what's actually commonsensical, but
Yeah, I want you
totally
to actually elaborate this one. I think this is
opposite of
very
it.
important point. From John Locke to John Stuart Mill, family, society, community, etc., was seen as mere collectives which are made in order to serve goals of several individuals. But in actual, it's the other way around. So
Indeed.
correct, the
I mean,
elites,
the
the elites. Go ahead, go ahead.
yeah, yeah. Well, please, please. Your point. The elites. I wanted to hear this.
Yeah, see in any society, the elites are going to decide. Okay, whoever they may be, correct. It doesn't really matter whom we are talking about. The elites are going to decide whether a society, a civilization, or a nation is going to succeed or fail. So
True, true.
correct. It is called a systems thinking. So
Yeah.
take the example of US dollar. Okay. Take an example.
Hmm.
If today the US dollar value goes down by let's say 90%, what will happen?
Huge
What will
impact on
happen?
various.
Correct. What will happen to the American economy? What will happen to the American hegemony? What will happen to American military power? Correct. So, like, so if you have a helicopter view, and if you know, okay, if I going to move, correct, there are levers of power. Okay, how systems work.
Hmm,
You can
hmm.
have a whole aircraft, but no engine, then it has no value. Correct.
Yep,
So
yep.
engine is a very critical component of the aircraft system. You would also need
Indeed.
an aircraft body. Correct. You will also need the
Hmm, hmm.
you will also need the what they call
Wings,
other no, not wings. They are called the okay,
rotors.
forget. So there would be like there are multiple components, but there are few components which are actually make or break the thing.
Okay,
So
okay. Hmm.
even everything remains as it is, just the US dollar value goes down by 90%, it depreciates, then that depreciation means the US hegemony, economic hegemony will go down. With the economic hegemony, the military power will wane. They will not have money to actually pay the people who are at the military barracks around the world. US has around 700 military bases. They will not have the money
Yeah,
to
yeah.
pay. Correct. So by just doing one thing, the cascading second, third, fourth other impact, that one act will create 10 more actions which are result of the first action. In the same way that's how systems work. So in that same way,
Indeed.
we need to break the critical component of the system which was built to create the colonized mindset. We need to break that those specific critical components, and by effect of that you will be able to actually negate and wane the impact of that system over a long period of time. So education is one of them. And same
True.
way the same way the elites are there. So if you can actually change the way elite function and elite think, then actually you can have a greater impact. If take for example all the billionaires that India has, they start investing in gurukuls. Okay. They start in investing in building temples. They start putting money to actually promote Bharatiya culture tradition. What will happen? It will have a correct very big and a very enormous impact in a short span of time, which might have taken generations, might take one and a half generation to do and make Bharatiya society a dharmic society. This is a interesting thing. Democracy is a fraud ideology which is imposed by the Western country. Democracy doesn't exist in the real world. Hmm. Yeah, let's see. There are any other things? Okay, I think Rishi also left. No issues. Okay, do we have any other things to take care? Okay, there are no questions, but only a few comments which already have taken. Okay, so thank you everybody for joining. We have two more special podcasts are coming. This tomorrow we have one podcast on Japan, very interesting topic on Japan we have chosen, and there's one more cast episode coming, cast in Germany, which will be happening on Sunday. So stay tuned, subscribe to our channel, share our content, and do support us if you want by taking membership or scanning the QR code to help to run this channel. Thank you. Jai Shri Ram. Vande Mataram.